The night on the alien moon was cold and silent, yet the forest was never safe for small creatures, because the Xeric hunters moved in the dark like shadows with claws and teeth sharp enough to tear through bone and hide. And on this night, they found something they had never seen before: a tiny figure sitting alone under a great tree with leaves black as oil. The little creature was small, with soft skin the color of pale sand, and hair like dark fire, and eyes that watched the hunters. Without fear, the Xeric leader, a tall figure with spines along his back and a jagged scar across his jaw, hissed a command to his pack, and they spread out, surrounding the child, thinking she would run or cry or scream. But she did none of those things. Instead, she looked at them with calm eyes and whispered words they did not understand, but the tone was cold and the meaning clear in the way it made the smallest hunter take a step back. The leader barked a laugh deep in his throat and motioned for two hunters to grab the strange creature. The child was lifted easily, her small body light as a feather, yet her gaze stayed locked on the leader, and she spoke again in the same calm voice, this time in words they could understand. "You should not have done this." The words made some of the pack exchange uneasy glances, but the leader ignored it, thinking she was just trying to frighten them. He had hunted many strange things in his life, and none had ever scared him. Yet, as they carried her away through the dark forest, he noticed her eyes never moved from his face, as if she was memorizing every line, every scar, every detail. High above the alien moon, in the black silence of space, a human warship drifted like a sleeping giant, its hull covered in black armor plates that absorbed light, and its engines glowing faintly as it scanned the surface below. Inside the command deck, the captain stood still, staring at the glowing screen that now showed a red dot blinking in the middle of the forest. The ship's AI had just identified it as a distress beacon, a code that only humans used when a young one was in danger. The captain turned his head slowly toward the crew, his voice quiet but sharp like a blade. "We have a cub on the ground, and it is not alone. All guns ready, prepare for drop." The crew moved without hesitation, the air filled with the hum of power systems coming to life, the sound of weapons locking into place, and the steady tone of the targeting systems as they began to track the movement of the Xeric pack on the surface. Back in the forest, the Xeric moved fast, leaping over fallen trees and climbing rocky slopes, with the child held tightly between two hunters. They spoke in low voices, wondering what kind of creature she was, and if she could be traded for weapons or food or power. The leader told them they would find out later. For now, they needed to get her to the den before any other predators caught the scent. But the smallest hunter could not shake the feeling that they were being watched. He kept glancing at the sky, where strange lights flickered and faded like the glow of faraway stars, moving where stars should not move. And each time he looked, the child was looking too, her lips curling slightly, as if she knew something he did not. When they reached the mountain pass, the leader paused to listen to the wind, but what he heard was not the wind. It was a faint low hum that made the ground tremble, just enough to feel through his claws. The child spoke again, her voice still calm, still cold. "My pack is coming." The hunters laughed, though their laughter sounded hollow in the empty night. The leader told them not to fear, for humans were weak prey animals who used machines because they could not fight with their own bodies. He told them stories of humans who ran from battle and begged for mercy. He told them this one would be no different, but in his mind the words of the child stayed like a thorn. Far above the moon, the warship's AI spoke in a voice that had no emotion. "Target lock, complete coordinates, confirmed weapons at full charge." The captain nodded. "Once return the child or be erased." The message was sent across every open channel in 100 alien languages. It echoed through the air near the Xeric pack, making the smaller hunters stop and look around. The leader snarled and told them it was nothing, just another empty threat. But deep in his chest, something old and buried began to stir, an instinct older than his kind, an instinct that whispered of danger. The child tilted her head up to the sky, her eyes catching the faint light of the moving stars, and she smiled, not the smile of fear or relief, but the smile of someone who knew the ending of a story before anyone else could guess it. She spoke one last time before the pack entered the shadow of the mountain. "You took me, and now you will pay." The leader ignored her, but the sound of the hum grew louder, and the air began to taste of metal and storm, as if the sky itself was about to fall. The mountains rose like the teeth of some great beast, their jagged edges cutting into the black sky, and the cold wind howled through the narrow pass as the Xeric pack carried the human child deeper into their hunting grounds. The path was steep and broken with loose stones that rolled away into the dark valleys below, and the only light came from the pale blue glow of the fungi that clung to the rocks and shivered whenever the wind touched them. The leader moved first, his long claws gripping the stone with ease, his eyes scanning for any sign of movement behind them. The smallest hunter kept glancing back toward the forest, his mind replaying the strange hum that had trembled through the ground moments before he wanted to speak. But the look in the leader's eyes told him to stay silent. The child, however, was not silent. She sat across the shoulders of one of the larger hunters, her hands resting lightly on the spines along his back, her face calm, her eyes bright as if she were riding towards something she had been waiting for all along. Her voice was quiet, but it carried through the pass. My pack is coming, she said again. The larger hunter snorted in amusement and told her that no one would dare follow the Xeric into their mountains. The leader added that humans were weak creatures who hid behind metal walls and fired their weapons from a safe distance. He said that once they reached the den, the cub would be a prize to bargain with, a piece of bait to trade for whatever the Xeric wanted. In the great markets of the outer worlds, far above them in the endless night of space, the human warship moved like a predator itself, its black hull reflecting nothing, its engines whispering as they cut through the void. Inside the command deck, the crew worked in perfect silence, their hands moving across controls, their eyes locked on the tracking display that now showed the position of the Xeric pack. With the child at its center, the captain stood with his arms crossed, his face hard as carved stone, his voice low and controlled as he spoke to the ship's AI. Confirm position, confirm life signs, and prepare the first warning. The AI responded in a tone that was almost human in its precision. The target is confirmed. The child is alive and stable. The pack is moving into a fortified area. The captain gave a single nod, then ordered, open every channel, every frequency, every signal they can hear. Make sure it reaches them. Make sure it reaches the entire moon. Moments later, a voice thundered into the thin mountain air. It came from everywhere at once, from the sky, from the rocks, from the very wind itself. Return the child, or be erased. The words were spoken in the ancient tongue of the Xeric, and in a dozen other languages in rapid echoes that left no time to mistake their meaning. The hunters stopped in their tracks. The smallest hunter froze, his claws digging into the stone. The larger hunter shifted uneasily beneath the child's weight. The leader snarled and spat on the ground, saying it was just a trick, some kind of bluff meant to scare them away from their prize. But the smallest hunter whispered under his breath, it did not sound like a bluff. The voice had no fear in it, no doubt, no weakness. It was the voice of something that had no reason to pretend. The child turned her head and looked at the leader, her eyes steady, and her lips curling slightly into that same small smile she had given before the leader hissed at her to be quiet. But she did not stop. She said, they know where you are, they know how many you are, and they will take me back, and you will not stop them. The leader growled and told the pack to move faster. They scrambled over the rocks and climbed into a narrow gap in the cliff face, where the shadows were thick and the air smelled of old bones. And Ashir the Xeric had carved out their den over many seasons, a twisting maze of stone tunnels and chambers deep under the mountain. It was a place they believed no enemy could reach. They had survived raids and wars and storms here, and they believed they would survive again. Inside the den, the walls glistened with moisture. The air was heavy and damp. The hunters dropped the child onto a flat rock in the center of the main chamber, while the leader sent others to set traps at the outer tunnels, barbed nets that could cut through flesh pits lined with sharpened bones, and silent alarms that would sing into the dark when touched by an intruder. The child sat still, watching them work, her eyes following every movement as if she could already see where each trap would fail. Outside the mountain, the human warship adjusted its position, drifting closer to the surface, like a shadow over the land. In the hangar bay, black armored soldiers moved in rows, their weapons held tight, their faces hidden behind visors that reflected no light. These were ghost marines, the kind of soldiers sent only when there could be no mistakes, no survivors, no unfinished work. They loaded their rifles with silent clicks, their boots ringing softly on the steel floor as they marched toward the drop pods. The captain walked among them, speaking few words. Remember what you are here for. Retrieve the cub, punish those who took her. Let them remember this day until the end of their kind. The Marines answered with a single word, understood. Then they stepped into the drop pods, their armor locking into the harnesses around them, the hatches sealing shut. The captain looked to the AI, dropped them. He ordered the pods shot out of the warship, with a low, heavy thud vanishing into the dark as they burned through the thin clouds toward the mountain, their engines whispering like breath. In the stillness of night, the descent was swift, silent, deadly. In the den, the smallest hunter suddenly stiffened. He heard something, a faint sound like distant thunder, but not from the sky. It was coming from inside the mountain, from the tunnels. The leader heard it too, but told the pack it was nothing. The child spoke again, her voice softer. Now, they are already here. You just cannot see them. Yet the words made the largest hunter grip his weapon tighter. Then the sound came again, louder, closer, the faint metallic echo of something moving with purpose. The leader sent 2 hunters to check the outer tunnels. They vanished into the dark. Minutes passed, and they did not return. One of the younger hunters began to whisper prayers under his breath. The leader told him to shut his mouth, but even his own voice had lost some of its edge. The child watched and waited, her small hands resting in her lap, her eyes never leaving the leader's face. She knew the first warning had been given and ignored. She knew the next would not be words, it would be action, and when it came, it would be swift and without mercy. Outside the mountain, in the blackness of the forest, the ghost Marines moved like liquid shadow, their armor blending into the night, their steps making no sound at all. They slipped between the traps, as if they already knew where they were. They left no tracks, no scent, no heat. They were the promise the captain had made, given shape and steel. Above them, the warship hovered silent and waiting, its guns awake, its eyes locked on the mountain, ready for what would come next. The mountain slept under a blanket of cold mist, yet within its stone heart the air was tight with fear and the scent of strangers. The Zarek leader stood at the center of the den, his claws scraping slow marks into the rock, while his pack shifted uneasily around the child, their movements restless, their eyes darting toward the black mouths of the tunnels, where shadows swayed like something alive. He told them the humans would not dare to enter, that this was the home of the hunters, and here the prey never left alive. But even as he spoke, the echo of the strange metallic sounds from earlier still lingered in the walls, like the faint heartbeat of something vast drawing closer. The child sat on the flat stone with her hands folded, her legs drawn in, and her gaze fixed on the largest of the tunnel mouths. Her breathing was steady, her head tilted slightly, as if she could hear something no one else could hear. She said softly, "They're inside already. They are watching you. They will not rush. They want you to feel them coming." The smallest hunter snarled at her words, though his voice cracked in the middle, and the leader snapped at him to keep quiet. The more noise they made, the less they could listen for the real danger. Far above in the night sky, the human warship remained still against the backdrop of the stars. The captain's eyes locked on the surface feed that showed the heat traces of the mountain. The red glow of the Zarek clustered in their den, and the cooler, shifting shapes of the ghost Marines as they moved through the tunnels below. The AI marked each Marine with a faint white icon tracking their heartbeats, their breathing, their weapon status. The captain asked for confirmation. "Target proximity," the AI replied. "Ghost units are within striking distance. Recommend silent elimination." In the tunnels, the ghost Marines moved like smoke, their armor absorbing the dim glow of the fungi, their steps light and sure as they bypassed the crude traps laid by the Zarek. Each Marine wore a visor that mapped the tunnels in real time, showing every turn, every hidden entrance, every heat source and heartbeat within their range. When a sentry appeared ahead, his back turned, one Marine raised a blade shaped like a shard of night, and in one fluid motion the sentry was gone, his body caught and lowered to the ground without a sound. Inside the den, 2 hunters were speaking in hushed voices, debating whether to seal the tunnels with fire. The leader heard them and struck the rock wall with his claws to silence them. His eyes flicked toward the child, who still sat unmoving, as if waiting for some signal. Then came a faint sound like a breath right behind one of the outer guards. The guard spun, but saw nothing, only the soft drip of water from the ceiling. His hand tightened on his spear, yet before he could call out, something cold touched his throat, and the world faded to black. The smallest hunter caught a flicker of movement in the corner of his vision, and cried out. The others turned, but the tunnel was empty, only shadows that seemed to shift in the glow of the fungi. The leader growled, telling them to hold formation. The child's voice came again, "They are taking you one by one, until there is no one left to fight." The Marines were close enough now to hear the low growls of the pack, their helmets filtering the sounds through layers of data. Each growl tagged and located the leading Marine, signaled to split into 2 units, one to seal the outer routes, the other to move straight Into the den the air grew thicker, with the smell of Xeric musk and damp stone, the sound of claws on rock echoing through the narrow passages ahead. The first Marine to reach the den's edge crouched in the shadows, watching the pack through the visor display. Targets marked in red, the cub marked in green. The signal came through when the commander's voice: recover the cub, neutralize resistance, no survivors. From her place on the stone, the child finally moved, standing slowly, her small hands hanging loosely at her sides, her head turning toward the tunnel that hid the Marines. She knew they were there before they stepped into the light. The leader saw her glance and spun, just as two black armored figures slid from the darkness like pieces of the night, come alive. Their rifles raised, their armor reflecting nothing, their faces hidden behind black glass. The leader roared a challenge and lunged, but his claws met only air. The nearest Marine moved aside with a speed that made the other hunters gasp. A flash of movement, a hiss of air, and the leader's right arm hung limp at his side. The second Marine aimed at the larger hunter, holding the child. A sharp burst of sound filled the chamber, and the hunter fell with a heavy crash. The child stepped away from the body, without fear, walking toward the nearest black figure, her voice calm and almost warm. "You came." The Marine knelt and lifted her into his arms as if she weighed nothing. The leader's voice rose in a furious cry: "Kill them all!" But the ghost Marines were already in motion, moving through the pack with quiet violence, their strikes precise, their movements like the flow of water. The Xeric fought with claws and teeth, but found only empty air or the hard wall of a Marine's armor. Every strike returned with lethal speed, every attempt to retreat cut off by another black figure emerging from the tunnels. The smallest hunter fled into one of the deeper passages, thinking to escape and warn others. But as he ran, he found the way already blocked by two more Marines, their weapons ready, their presence silent, yet suffocating. He backed away, but the shadows behind him shifted, and another Marine closed the path. He felt his knees, his eyes wide, as he realized the humans had been everywhere from the start. The leader fought until his body could no longer rise, each wound deep, each breath a struggle, yet his eyes still burned with rage. He looked toward the child, who now rested safely in the arms of the Marine commander. She met his gaze, without a word, her silence louder than any threat he had ever heard. And in that silence he understood the meaning of the first warning. He had ignored it. Was not a chance to escape, it was a promise of what would follow. The Marines began to withdraw, carrying the cub, and moving as one through the tunnels. They left behind nothing but silence, broken only by the faint drip of water and the rasping breaths of the dying. The den that had stood for countless seasons now felt small and cold, its shadows no longer a shield but a grave. Outside the mountain, the night air welcomed the ghost Marines. With the distant hum of the warships' engines, the drop pods rose back into the sky, their black hulls vanishing into the stars, as if they had never been there at all. The mountain lay quiet once more, yet in that quiet the truth settled heavy and final. The hunt had ended, and the hunters had lost. The mountain lay under a shroud of black mist, the cold air moving slow through the broken trees at its base, and the ground itself seemed to listen for the movements of those who hunted within its heart. The ghost Marines were not rushing now, for the cub was safe in their arms, and yet their mission was not finished, for the Xeric had touched what should never be touched, and for that there was a price, the kind of price that humans always collect with patience and precision. Inside the deeper tunnels, the survivors of the pack gathered around the leader, their eyes wide, their bodies trembling with the memory of the black figures that had passed through them like death made flesh. Some spoke of retreat, some of sealing themselves in the deepest chambers until the danger passed, but the leader silenced them with a snarl, his pride a weight heavier than the fear pressing into his chest. He said they would wait in the shadows and strike when the humans came again, for surely they would return to finish the kill. What he did not know was that the humans were already inside again, their steps silent, their armor cold, their faces hidden. The ghost Marines moved not to attack, but to watch. They marked each living Xeric. They learned where they sat, where they walked, where they slept, and with each breath the Xeric felt the weight of unseen eyes. The smallest hunter began to shake, without knowing why, his mind whispering that each shadow now held a shape that could reach out and take him without sound, without mercy. In the upper chamber, where the light from the fungi fell in a soft blue haze, the leader sat alone, sharpening his bone blade, yet his hands would not stay steady. The scrape of the blade against stone seemed too loud in the silence. He kept looking toward the narrow tunnel where the earlier attack had come from half expecting the black glass face of a Marine to appear. Without warning, he told himself that the humans would not waste time on fear, that they would simply attack, and yet deep down he understood the truth. They were already attacking. This was the attack. It had begun the moment the cub had been taken, and it would not end until they broke inside. Far above, the warship circled, its guns asleep for now, but its sensors wide awake. The captain spoke softly to the AI, asking for the state of the remaining Zarek. The AI replied with calm precision, "Their heart rates are high, their movements are erratic, they are speaking less, they are sleeping less, they are being unmade from the inside." The captain's mouth curved into a thin shadow of a smile. This was how humans won, when they chose not to rush, break the mind before breaking the body, and the fight was over before the blade was drawn. In the tunnels, a pair of Marines passed within an arm's length of a sleeping hunter, their armor bending the light so that the eye would not catch their shape. The hunter woke without knowing why, his claws twitching, his breath fast. He smelled nothing, he saw nothing, yet the air felt heavy, as if something vast stood over him. He crawled away into another chamber, and there he found another hunter staring into the dark, eyes wide and dry as stone. Both said nothing, for there was nothing to say. They knew without words that they were prey now. The child sat in the medbay of the warship, her small hands wrapped around a cup of warm liquid, her eyes watching the ceiling, as if she could still see the tunnels above her head. She asked the Marine standing guard, "Will they stop when the others are gone?" The Marine answered in a voice low and even, "No, we stop when the lesson is learned." She nodded slowly, as if she already knew that answer. Back in the mountain, the Zarek began to hear things, faint whispers in the stone, the sound of claws that never came closer, the soft hum that had filled the forest before the warning had been given. The smallest hunter swore he saw a black figure in the corner of the chamber, but when he looked again, it was gone. The leader told him he was weak, that fear was a sickness. But later in the dark, when the leader was alone, he too felt the weight of a presence watching him unseen, and his claws curled tighter around his blade. Hours passed, or perhaps only minutes. Time had lost meaning for the pack. Then a sound came from one of the deeper tunnels, the sound of something falling, and then silence. The leader sent 2 hunters to check. They never returned. The pack waited, listening for any sound of fight or struggle, but there was nothing, only the slow drip of water and the sound of their own hearts. The ghost Marines had not fired a shot, they had not drawn the blade, they had not spoken, yet the den felt smaller with each breath, the air harder to take in. The leader finally gave the order to move deeper into the mountain, thinking there they might find some safety. But the Marines were already waiting there too. Each tunnel they entered seemed to hold a shadow, just out of sight, each chamber colder than the last. The pack began to turn on itself, whispers of who had led them into this trap, whispers of leaving the leader behind. By time the leader heard every word, though none spoke them to his face, he understood that his pack was already broken. The humans had cut through their unity without striking a single killing blow, and in that understanding he felt something alien to him, a deep cold weight that had no name in his tongue, but in the human language it would be called dread. The captain on the warship watched the feed from the helmet cams of the Marines. He saw the pack huddle closer together, their heads snapping toward every small sound. He saw the smallest hunter cover his ears, as if that would keep out the fear. He saw the leader sitting with his blade across his knees, his eyes no longer searching for an enemy to fight, but for a way to escape that did not exist. The captain spoke to the AI, "Begin phase 2, and the AI answered, acknowledged. In the tunnels, the Marines began to move again, slower than before, each step deliberate, each appearance brief enough to vanish before it could be certain they were there. The Zarek began to lash out at nothing, their claws striking walls and shadows, their strength wasted on air. In the upper chamber, the leader heard a soft metallic sound behind him. He spun, but there was only the glow of the fungi. Yet, when he turned back, his blade was gone, taken without his notice. The final crack in his control. The child in the medbay closed her eyes, as if she could feel it happening far below. She whispered, "They will run soon." And the Marine guard said, "No, they will not run, they will crawl." The words hung in the air, heavy and certain. In the mountain, the first to break was the smallest hunter. He bolted into a side tunnel, desperate to escape, but the Marines let him go, letting his panic spread to the rest. Soon another followed, then another, each vanishing into tunnels that would lead them not to freedom, but deeper into the silent watch of the humans. The leader sat alone now, surrounded not by his pack, but by the endless weight of the shadows, and he understood that the humans had not come here for a battle. They had come for something far worse. They had come to take away everything that made him a hunter until nothing remained. The mountain was no longer a home. It was a trap of stone and fear and silence, the kind of silence that made the air feel heavy on the skin, the kind of silence that carried the scent of endings. The leader sat in the upper chamber, his claws curling and uncurling, his mind dragging through the long hours since the cub had been taken from his grasp, every moment replaying the same question. How had his kind, the hunters of the deep worlds, been turned into prey without a single battle to mark the change? He had believed the humans would not dare to fight in the dark. He had believed his pack was untouchable, and now those beliefs lay shattered around him like bone dust in the wind. The ghost Marines had given him time, but not for mercy. The time was given so the weight of what was coming would press harder until it broke him. And now the moment had come. The tunnels shifted with sound, faint at first, like the slow beating of a heart, then louder, the hum of human weapons, charging, the heavy step of boots on stone. The air itself tasted sharp, like metal, and Storm, the leader, rose, gripping his bone blade tight, calling for the few hunters that still remained to him. But his voice echoed back unanswered. Those who had not already fled now lay silent in the tunnels, claimed by the shadows, without a cry. From the largest tunnel mouth, 3 Marines appeared, their armor black, their visors like the surface of deep water. The leader's blade lifted in challenge, yet he felt a tremor in his arm as they advanced. Without hurry, without hesitation, they did not speak, and they did not fire. Instead, they moved in a slow arc around him, as if studying an animal in a cage. The leader snarled and lunged, his blade flashing, but it met only air. 1 Marine slid past him like smoke. Another caught the blade in a gloved hand and twisted it free, the weapon falling to the floor with a sound that rang like a final breath. In the warship above, the captain stood on the command deck, watching through the helmet feed of the Marines. He spoke one short command: collect the debt, and the words moved like a current through the comms, reaching the ears of every soldier in the tunnels. The Marine struck then, but not in the wild rush the Zarek had expected. Each move was deliberate, each blow placed with exact force to drop a target without ending them. At once the leader fell to one knee under the weight of a strike to his chest, his breath sharp and ragged, but his eyes still defiant. The Marines gave him no time to rise. One reached down and hauled him to his feet, not as a rescue, but as a display, dragging him toward the center of the chamber where the other captured hunters now knelt, their wrists bound with bands that tightened the more they fought. The cub stood there too, unharmed, her small frame dwarfed by the Marine commander beside her. She looked at the leader, her expression unreadable, yet in her eyes there was the calm certainty of one who has already seen the end. She spoke to him in the Zarek tongue, a language she should not have known. You took me from my pack, and now my pack takes from you. He did not answer, because there was nothing left to answer with. The Marines began their work in silence, moving among the captives, methodically stripping them of their weapons, cutting away the trophies they had taken from past hunts, shattering them against the stone, until nothing remained of the pride the Zarek carried into battle. The leader was forced to watch as each memory of victory was reduced to shards, the sound of breaking bone and breaking history filling the chamber. Then came the second phase. The Marines did not kill quickly. Each strike was measured to bring pain without release, each motion controlled to make the victims feel the slow crushing of strength. The Zarek, who tried to roar in defiance, found the sound caught in his throat as another blow stole the breath from his body. Those who tried to crawl away were dragged back to the center under the cold grip of armored hands. The leader felt every moment as if the punishment was his alone, though it was shared among them all. He felt the loss of his blade, the loss of his pack, the loss of the mountain itself, as the Marines moved deeper, planting charges along the walls, their intent not only to take the lives of those within, but to erase the very place they had called safe, the den that had stood for seasons without fear, now marked for fire and stonefall. High above, the AI's voice came into the captain's ear: charges placed in all primary chambers, secondary tunnels, sealed all ghost units. Accounted. The captain's reply was calm: proceed. And the AI acknowledged with the cold certainty of a machine built for war. The leader was forced to his knees again, this time in front of the cub. She stepped closer, a small hand reaching up to touch the Marine commander's arm, a silent signal. He understood. He knelt so the cub could speak into the leader's face, her voice quiet yet sharper than any blade. Debt collected, she said, and then she turned away without looking back. The Marines moved with sudden precision, lifting the cub into the arms of the commander, and forming a protective wall around her. The leader watched them vanish into the tunnel, their black forms swallowed by shadow, and for the first time, he understood what it meant to be prey that would not even be given the mercy of a clean hunt. They were leaving him to die not by their hands, but by what would come next. The charges detonated in waves, the first blasts ripping through the outer walls, the second collapsing the deeper chambers. The sound rolled through the mountain like thunder made of stone. Dust filled the air, choking the last breaths from those who still fought to rise. The leader felt the ground shift under him, the weight of the mountain itself beginning to fold inward. He tried to stand, but his legs would not obey, his body broken, not only in bone, but in spirit. Outside in the cold night, the Marines emerged from the mountain, carrying the cub, their armor streaked with dust, but their pace unbroken. Behind them, the great stone face of the mountain split with a roar as fire burst from its mouth, and the ground shuddered under the collapse. The black mist rose higher, now filled with ash and embers, drifting toward the sky like the last breath of a dying beast. The cub rested her head against the commander's chest, her eyes still open, watching the mountain sink into itself until it was nothing more than a scar in the earth. She whispered a few words, meant only for herself. "They will not forget." And the commander answered, "No, they will not." The warship's engines burned brighter as it turned toward the stars. The mission complete, the price paid in full. The silence that followed was not the silence of fear, but the silence of something finished, something that had been promised and delivered without flaw. And in that silence the Zarek name was already beginning to fade from the list of those who might challenge the humans again. The night over the alien moon was black and endless, yet the stars that should have watched from above were gone, swallowed by the vast shadow of the human warship, drifting silently into position, its great hull hiding the light as it turned broadside to the planet below. Deep within its armored skin, the weapons of war awoke, one by one, their engines humming, their barrels unfolding like the limbs of some ancient predator roused from sleep. The captain stood at the center of the command deck, his eyes on the holomap that now showed the entire Zarek hunting range glowing in red, each den, each nest, each breeding ground marked with precision by the AI. The cub was safe in the medbay, her eyes closed, yet her breathing. Even the Marine commander stood at her side, silent. As the hum of the ship grew deeper, the AI spoke coordinates, locked orbital cannons, charged trajectory, confirmed. The captain gave no speech. He gave no warning. He simply raised his hand and brought it down, and the ship obeyed. In the thin air of the mountains, the surviving Zarek clan stirred uneasily, though they did not yet know why. Far above them in the black sky, streaks of faint light began to appear, at first like falling stars, but colder, sharper. They did not burn red with heat. They burned white, with the pure glare of weapons born in the hearts of human forges. These were not meant to be beautiful. They were meant to erase. The first strike fell on a den carved into the cliffs by generations of Zarek hunters. The blast came without sound at first, only light, so bright it turned night to day in the blink of an eye. Then came the roar, a sound that rolled over the land like a great wave, shaking the bones of every living thing. The cliff face shattered in an instant, the den and all within it gone, as if it had never been there. The shock wave raced outward, snapping trees, tearing the ground open. The air filled with dust and fire. From the warship, the captain watched the impact marks bloom across the surface, each one a point of light, expanding into darkness. Again the AI mark confirmed kill zones, one after another, the targeting systems shifting smoothly to the next coordinates. The Marines, who had returned from the mountain, stood at the viewing deck, silent as they watched the work unfold. They had fought in close tunnels, face to face, but this was different. This was the reach of their people, stretching down from the stars to strike without warning, without resistance. In the valleys, the Zarek tried to flee, scattering through the forests and over the hills, yet the sky followed them, each running form tagged by human sensors, each movement tracked and answered by the quiet judgment of a cannon round that fell faster than any could outrun. Entire hunting grounds vanished in clouds of soil and smoke. The rivers boiled, the lakes turned to steam. The glow of the fungi that had lit the forests for centuries faded to black. On the outer edges of the hunting range, the oldest Zarek warriors stood watching the horizon as it burned, their voices low as they spoke of old wars when their kind had fought and won against alien foes. But nothing in their memory matched this. There was no battle here, no exchange of blows. There was only the sky opening and the world beneath it breaking piece by piece. Their claws dug into the soil, yet There was no strength in the gesture. They knew the truth. They were not watching a fight. They were watching an ending. The AI on the warship continued its work, calmly broadcasting target confirmations in an unbroken rhythm, each word another piece of the Zarek map. Turning from red to black, the captain's eyes never left the display, his voice quiet to the Marine commander. Status: the commander replied, all ghost units aboard, no losses. The captain gave a single nod. Proceed with final sweep. In the forests, the last pockets of Zarek resistance gathered, thinking to hide beneath the thick canopies. Yet the humans had already marked the heat of their bodies, the sound of their hearts, the very patterns of their breath. The sky split again, and the ground rose in a wall of fire. The trees turned to white ash before they could fall. The screams of the survivors were short and carried away by the wind. The cub awoke in the medbay, her eyes finding the Marine commander. She asked, is it over? He shook his head. Not yet. Soon she turned her gaze toward the ceiling, as if she could see the fire raining down, and she said, they will remember. The commander answered, yes, they will, and so will everyone who hears of this night. In the last light of the burning horizon, the captain gave the order for the final mark. The AI acknowledged with the same calm it had used since the first strike. Primary targets eliminated, secondary targets engaged, cleanup protocols initiated across all coordinates. The great guns of the warship fell silent for a moment, then began to fire again, not at the dens or the hunters, but at the land itself, the fields where they grew food, the storage caves where they kept water, the migration paths where their prey beasts once moved, all erased with the same cold precision. By the time the last cannon fell silent, the Zarek lands were unrecognizable black scars, where green valleys had been jagged stone, where cliffs had once been smooth, a thin haze of ash rising into the upper air and spreading far beyond the horizon. In the silence that followed, the AI spoke, final strike complete, no remaining signals in the target range. The captain gave the order to record and broadcast the entire operation across all open channels on every frequency used in the outer worlds. The message would be simple, no words of threat, no call for surrender, only the images of the fire and the ash and the knowledge of what it meant. In the hunting grounds, nothing moved, no sound carried, but the slow settling of dust in the air. Those who might have survived in the far reaches would see the glow in the sky and know the truth. They were no longer a people who could hunt without fear. The humans had taken from them more than their cub. They had taken their ground, their food, their shelter. Their name would live now only as a warning. On the warship, the cub returned to her bed, curling into the blankets, her eyes closing once more. The hum of the engines was steady beneath her, the sound of the ship turning away from the moon and toward the stars. The Marine commander stood watch as he had before, his gaze fixed on the door. The captain stepped into the med bay for the first time since the mission began. He looked down at the cub and then to the commander and said quietly, it is done. The engines grew louder as the ship left the moon behind, carrying with it the memory of the night of ash. The stars began to return in the black sky over the dead hunting grounds, but they brought no comfort. They shone cold and far away, like the eyes of something that had watched and would watch again if called. The fire was gone, but the fear would stay. It would spread from one voice to another until it became a law spoken in every place the humans touched. Never take what is theirs and never take their young. Far beyond the burned moon, the human warship cut through the dark, its engines leaving no trail, no sign for hunters to follow. The crew moved in silence, though the air was heavy with the weight of what had been done. The captain sat in the command chair, his eyes fixed on the Black Sea ahead, yet his mind on the message, now racing through every corner of the known worlds. For the broadcast had gone out not only to the Zarek, but to every listening station in 100 systems. No code, no encryption. Only truth shone in fire and shadow. The night of ash played again and again in the cold light of alien screens. In the great trade hubs of the Outer Rim, merchants froze in the middle of their deals as the images filled the air. Between them, the sight of a mountain vanishing into light, the roar of the shockwave turning forests to white dust. They saw the mark of the human guns cutting the land apart, and though they had never seen a Zarek in the flesh, they knew the look in the eyes of those who ran from the sky. It was the look of prey caught in the open, and no one wanted to wear that look. In the deep halls of the Koran Council, the elders gathered in haste, their voices low though their eyes were wide. They spoke of old treaties and forgotten wars, of human ships that had once been seen far from any charted route, ships that came without warning and left before the dust of their passage had settled. They spoke now of what all could see, that the humans did not send warnings, They did not ask. They did not bargain when the life of one of their young was taken. They came with the weight of the sky and left only silence. On the mining moons of the Aresh belt, the workers who lived their whole lives beneath the rock stood in the mess halls, staring at the broadcast, their meals untouched. The oldest among them remembered the stories, told in half whispers, about a war long past, when humans were few yet still feared. And now the stories had faces and fire. They saw the blackened ground, the rivers turned to steam, the hunting dens crushed to dust, and they understood the lesson, though no one spoke it aloud. In the quiet water cities of the Thali, the scholars met in the high towers, their glass walls opening to the endless sea. They watched the broadcast and wrote it into their histories, for they knew such things must be remembered. They gave it a name in their own tongue, which meant the wrath of the child, and they set it beside the oldest laws of their people, not as a warning only to the Thali, but as a truth for all who would ever walk under the same stars. On the fringes of the galactic map, where law was thin and greed was thick, the message spread faster than any official decree. Smugglers saw it, pirates saw it, slavers saw it, each one watching the bright white fire fall from the sky, each one marking deep in their hearts the single fact that would matter from now on, that a human child was never alone, not even in the deepest dark, not even on the farthest world. Back on the warship, the Cub slept at last, her breathing steady. The Marine commander stood watch as he had from the first moment she was found. His armor scarred, his face still marked by the dust of the mountains. The captain entered the med bay for the second time, his steps quiet, as if not to wake her. The commander asked if the message had been received. The captain replied, "All channels, all worlds, all eyes." The commander nodded and said, "Then it is done." The captain looked down at the Cub and said, "No, this is not the end, this is the start." For in the days that followed, the message did more than warn. It reshaped the lines of trust and fear across the stars. In the ports where aliens once spoke of human trade, they now spoke of human vengeance. In the courts where crimes were weighed, they now weighed them against the image of the burning horizon. In the dark places where hunters planned their next raid, they now planned a way from any world where a human might walk. Among the Xeric survivors scattered beyond the hunting grounds, the elders gathered in broken ships, their voices hushed by the weight of loss. They knew they could not return to the old ways. They could not hunt without the sky itself watching, their claws dull against the cold metal floors. They spoke of new lands far from human reach, yet none among them believed such lands truly existed. Weeks passed, yet the broadcast did not fade, for it had been copied and carried by traders, by wanderers, by ships that passed from one world to another, until even those who had never met a human spoke of them in low voices, some with respect, some with fear, and some with both. They spoke the same line again and again: "Never take what is theirs, and never take their young." The Cub awoke one morning, her eyes bright, her voice stronger. She asked if she could see her home. The Marine commander promised she would, and soon. Yet before that, the captain came to stand beside her bed. He told her that her face and her name had crossed the stars, that her story had been carried farther than any single voice could travel. She asked why, and he answered, "Because you are the proof that we will always come." The ship turned toward Earth, its hull carrying the marks of battle, yet its course steady. Behind it, the shadow of the burned moon grew smaller, until it was no more than a dark speck in the endless black. Yet its story would not shrink, for it had taken root in the minds of all who had seen the fire fall from the sky. On a station at the edge of the Orion Spur, a young alien sat in a dim corner, listening to the old, telling the tale of the night of ash. Their voice slow, their eyes far away. They spoke of the humans and their law, and the young one asked if it was true, if they would cross the stars for one of their own. The elder nodded and said, "It is true, and it is the way of their kind. They do not forget, and they do not forgive." And so the law of the stars was said in words that needed no treaty and no counsel. "Never take from the humans, for if you do, they will find you, no matter how far, no matter how deep. And when they come, they will bring the fire, and the sky will burn until nothing of you remains." The night of ash became more than an event. It became a story told in the markets and the mines and the palaces and the prisons, until even those who had never seen a human knew the truth. In the quiet hours of the journey home, the captain stood alone at the viewing deck, the stars stretching before him, endless and cold, yet somehow closer now, for he knew that every light in the dark was a place they could reach if they had to, and that knowledge was both a promise and a warning. He thought of the Cub safe in her bed, of the commander standing guard, and of the voice that would carry their story long after the fire was gone. He closed his eyes for a moment, and in that silence he could almost hear the words carried on the winds of 100 worlds. We always come.